Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. This is part 3. It's been a little bit since I've done this, a week and a half, 2 weeks maybe. Dr. Roy gives a brief overview of the U.S. presidency. I know he mentioned, I have to yawn. It's December 26th, so people celebrating, I almost said 4th of July. People celebrating Christmas. Hope you had a great Christmas. I watched Band of Brothers and then Count of Monte Cristo. December 24th, I played Grand Theft Auto 5. Played some this morning. Gotta take my tree down. But anyways, this is part 5. I know he mentioned some of James Madison, a little bit of the presidency. I'm hoping he'll get into the presidency. But anyways, click that thumbs up, subscribe, click the thanks button, donate to the channel, request a video. You get your name sponsoring that video. Okay? I'm done talking. Video. This is 21-ish minutes.
It's too vague, I think. In other words, Madison's goal was to create a republic where the president would serve as part of the republic, but not the guy in total charge. It would be Congress that was in charge. Because think about it.
Where was James Madison serving? It wasn't the presidency. It was Congress. Why did he want Congress to be more powerful than the presidency? Because he didn't expect to be a president, but he knew he would be in Congress.
The presidency is the monarchy. Congress is the republic. Also, the Supreme Court is part of the monarchy as well, right? Because there's absolutely nothing democratic in any way, shape, or form about having a Supreme Court. You're just having some random arbitrary body come in and make legislative decisions for you, which, by the way, is nowhere in the Constitution. What happened was Chief Justice Marshall in Marbury versus Madison, 1803, stole the ability to determine the constitutionality of a law out of the ether. He stole it from the states. The states had that authority. And once he did, there was nothing anybody could do to stop it. In other words, what is the power the Supreme Court wields? It is the ability to say, nope, unconstitutional, and stop you. That authority is nowhere given to the Supreme Court by the Constitution. Madison didn't want to have the president in charge. He wanted Congress in charge. He didn't want the judiciary in charge. He wanted Congress in charge. And if you look at the initial government that we formed, that is essentially what happened. We think of the presidents and we don't think of Congress, but that's because we've become increasingly more and more monarchical as the decades have gone on, including the kind of authority we give to the presidency. In other words, the president's power grows decade after decade after decade. And we have actually probably transitioned into something more akin to a monarchy than a republic. But that's mostly because Congress has sacrificed its ability to generate law. It spends all its time filibustering and killing each other's laws instead of wheeling and dealing and making really corrupt laws, right? So I'm going to just go ahead and say it because it needs to be said. So John McCain, I actually like John McCain. I just want to come out and say it. Probably don't agree with him on many things ideologically. Who cares? If you've got a guy who's not corrupt, that's so much better than a guy you agree with. Because at least you know he's coming from a place of, I'm trying to do the right thing. And, you know, a little bit of talent trying to do the right thing, maybe you'll land on it every once in a while. One can hope. John McCain was an anti-corruption maverick, that was his nickname, Maverick, who was trying to get law after law after law passed to try and clean up American politics. He went after campaign financing, lots of things. One of the things was earmarks. All right, so long story short, Indiana wants to build I-69 using federal funding. I-69 didn't exist. Indiana created it out of the ether, built part of it, went to the federal government and goes, when are you going to finish this thing? And nobody ever wants to admit they don't know what you're talking about, right? So they're always like, oh yeah, instead of what I-69? Show me, who put that on the map?
Sorry about that. Are we gonna? There we go.
I don't even know what that is. Did we do that? Right? No. Yeah, I forgot. It's like when somebody says, have you heard of Frank Herbert? Everybody's like, yeah. No. Just admit you don't know, it's okay. You're not the internet. Especially if you went to Texas public schools. I had to do the dig. I couldn't help myself. I'm a victim too. We'll get through this together. By the way, I don't know if you know this, there's these really weird things. They're like handheld computers. You can like literally look up everything. We should be the smartest generation in the human experience, and I think we might be the dumbest. So I don't know how that happened. I'm really upset about it. We'll work through it though, I'm sure. Well, until AI takes over, and then it's over. I have a friend who's a CEO of an AI company. He probably hates it every time I say that. I'm sorry, Jonathan, forgive me. I doubt he watches my stuff. He's gonna post, no, I watched your stuff, and then call me a name. All right, so, I lost my train of thought when I did that. It's just old age, I shouldn't do. I-69, thank you. The Hoosiers want to get this thing done. By the way, they were really clever, and they drew it on the map, with the crayon obviously, and it went all the way to Texas, and it went to Victoria, and then from there they didn't know where it ended. So they were like, McAllen, Brownsville, I don't know, Laredo, you pick. It needs to be Laredo, obviously. I believe Laredo has now passed LA for being the largest port. You're like, it's inland, how can that be? The Chinese now send their goods to Mexico and then they run it over land to Laredo. And that's how the goods are coming into the United States instead of going to LA. LA. I don't know why that's more efficient. I'm sure it's not, but I'm sure there's a reason to do it. But anyway, that's what we're doing. So the Hoosiers get us in it and every state in between. Because they're like, look, if you vote for this bill, you'll get all this federal highway funding and a new interstate. Don't you want a new interstate? Everybody wants a new interstate. So everybody signs on, but that was only like 10 states. Well, you need 26 in the Senate, and then you're gonna wanna have some really big states in the House. So how do you get the other votes? And what you used to do was earmarks. You'd go to each group of representatives and senators that you liked or didn't like even, who cares? And you go, what do you need? What does your state need? You need a bridge? You need a nuclear power plant? A new military base? What do you want? And then you just add it into your bill. And now you've got their votes. And if memory serves correctly, Alaska said we want to build a bridge. I forgot the name of the town. Ketchikan. They wanted to build a bridge in Ketchikan, Alaska. The airport's on an island. Ketchikan is like a lot of Alaskan towns. You know the part of Alaska that juts down along the Canadian coast, and you're like, why isn't that just part of Canada? You can't build a road to Canada. The Rocky Mountains are just too brutal. The population in that part of Alaska don't warrant a road. You'd have to tunnel through. Forget it. It's not worth it. So even though Ketchikan is physically on the North American continent, it's not on an island. The only way to get there is by boat or plane, because it's effectively an island. So they had the airport on an island off the coast because they had so little land that you wanted to use the mainland for houses and businesses. So you had to get to the airport by ferry because there was no bridge. So I think they wanted a $386 million bridge. The bill passes, John McCain reads the bill, loses it, gets up in front of the country and calls it a bridge to nowhere because there are 50 people living on the island plus the airport. And he's like, dude, you could have bought each individual their own plane, hired a pilot, paid for the insurance, the repairs, and the fuel for the life of that person, and you would have saved money. And what he discovered was all the Alaska politicians, before they put the bridge on the bill, went and bought all the land up so that they could sell it to developers and make killer cash. And he went, I am done with earmarks. He went to war. We got rid of them. They're illegal now, and we haven't passed a bill since. When he did it, I was like my hero. And now I'm like, oh my God, that was such a big mistake. Who knew that politicians who couldn't express their corruption would never pass bills? You need the corruption to grease the wheels. So disappointing. I'm ready to get earmarks back, if that's what it takes. Earmarks and bribery, whatever you need, whatever form of corruption. I am anti-John McCain now. Let's go back to the old pirate days. That's what the term filibuster comes from, right? It's a piracy term, so we even admit it. All right, so one of the reasons why we're in this state is because we've gotten rid of a little too much corruption. But let me go back and start at the beginning and then work way through the presidency. So one of the questions that we ended up with right away with the presidency was, what are the president's limits? And an argument then broke out. Is the president limited to the things that the Constitution says the president can do? Or is the president allowed to do anything that the Constitution doesn't expressly say the president can't do? And so that actually becomes a little bit of a conversation, and it blows up when Jefferson buys the Louisiana Purchase, because it was unclear if he could do that. Also, it blew up when Jefferson refused to appoint the midnight appointments. In other words, Jefferson does a series of things that cause a lot of chaos and confusion. For the most part, though,
It's one of the reasons why I am not a fan of Jefferson.
those early presidents were relatively weak, especially when compared to the presidents that we have today. James K. Polk, the 11th president, comes along. He gets a bunch of bills passed. Before that, Andrew Jackson gets a lot of the stuff he wants done, including genocide and ethnic cleansing. He's the guy who initiates the Trail of Tears. He only gets 4 of the 5 nations he was after. His vice president becomes the next president, Martin Van Buren. He's the one who gets the Cherokee. The Cherokee were so life lesson time. Okay, so some of you think that what drives American racism is that you're different culturally and economically. I need to dissuade you from that. It's your skin color. Just don't get confused. Here, there was another group way before you who thought the same thing you think. And now all you had to do was assimilate yourself economically and culturally, and you'd be fine. They were the 5 civilized Indians: the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, and the Muskogee. They thought if they could whiteify themselves in every way other than their skin color, that we would be okay with them. So they went on a campaign to learn capitalism and implement it. They had lumber mills, gold mines, plantations where they grew tobacco and cotton, slaves. They put Africans, there were Native Americans with African slaves on those plantations. They integrated themselves to the extent to which they could. The Cherokee decided to write their language. They had a printing press. They were making newspapers written in their language. They took a bunch of different alphabets and they just strung them together. So there's like Cyrillic letters and Hebrew letters and Latin letters and Greek letters, and they made their own alphabet doing that. And the next thing you know, Andrew Jackson goes, it'd be great if my white friends had that plantation and that lumber mill and that gold mine. And he orders them to leave. Turns out, though, that the Cherokee were so integrated into the system, they understood it legally. So the other 4 are sent on the Trail of Tears, and they lose somewhere between 10 to 25% of their population just walking in a death march, a forced death march. But the Cherokee locked them up in court. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. Cherokee v. Georgia, the Cherokee won. And the Supreme Court said, you're not going to believe this. It sounds insane, 1835. The Supreme Court said it is unconstitutional to ethnically cleanse people. Are we in the United States? Anyway, Martin Van Buren blows that up and sends a group of thugs to the Cherokee, sticks a gun in the Cherokee chief's head, and says, sign this, it's the Treaty of New Echota, or we blow your brains out, go to the next in line, and then repeat. And eventually we'll either kill every single Cherokee or somebody will sign this treaty. And he signed it. So, isn't that great? All right, so Jackson initiates this, Martin Van Buren carries it out. So there are moments when you see the presidency expressing itself in ways that clearly transcend the idea that we're just simply a republic.
I thought the lawsuit happened when Jackson was in power. And the reason why I say that is because he gets attributed to the quote of the Supreme Court basically saying that the people in Georgia, or the tribe in Georgia, has a right to that land. They have their own government and everything like that. They can stay. And Jackson sent in the military. Well, let me go backwards. He told the people of Georgia, I don't support that. And there's nothing the federal government can do, but you as a state can. And Jackson is attributed to saying that John Marshall, the Supreme Court justice, made that ruling. Now he should bring a military out to protect the tribe because Jackson won't. And Jackson never actually said that, but yeah, Jackson just said, oh, okay, well, the Supreme Court says that, so you as a state, you have your state's rights. Go ahead and remove them yourselves. And they did. And they were reaching back out saying, the Supreme Court said this, and the state was like, states' rights, and just booted them out of there.
There are monarchical moments. James K. Polk.
That also could be a different tribe I'm thinking of, but that tribe did sue and won. So I think it's the same case. I think Martin Van Buren was just in charge of actually finishing the job of moving everyone out, but maybe there's another case, and I haven't studied Martin Van Buren, so there could be another case I just don't know about.
Triggers a war with Mexico and takes the northern 50%. You know, he took half of Mexico, right?
He didn't trigger the war. John Tyler, the 10th president, Polk was the 11th. Tyler approved the annexation of Texas, which pretty much was the flare, the flare going up saying, there's a war coming. And Polk got into office on 4 things. Basically, annex Texas, which had been done. I'm sure I'm going to get the 4 wrong. Make a divide between Canada and the U.S. Figure out the Mexico situation. I guess that, well, I'll say that was 3, where Mexico ends and the U.S. ends, and the path to the Pacific. And with that path to the Pacific, basically getting everyone out. Oh, and with the Canada situation, the British were there, and they were in Oregon and all that. He basically said, this is ours now. Here's the dividing line where we are and where Canada is. You are basically a part of Canada, even though Canada was a part of them. And he said, so you're on the wrong side of the line. Do you want a war? James K. Polk did not mess around. He is an underrated president in terms of expansionists. He was a workaholic. They say he was in the office anywhere from 18 to 21 hours a day. He's the reason why when a president walks into the room, Hail to the Chief is played, because he was a very quiet guy his wife wanted him to have that power and authority. He walked into a room, people might look at it and be like, hey, whatever. His wife walked into a room and they were like, oh, hey, I don't remember his wife's name. And they'd want to talk to her because he was just a guy that was very standoffish. Some people thought was just kind of rude, but he was just not one of those people who mingled well. So his wife had that song played, so when he walked in, you gave him the respect that was due. But Polk was such a workaholic that I think he died 3 months after he left office. I keep looking over here because I have a book over there. It's a country of vast designs. I had to read it sideways. A country of fast. No, a country of vast, V-A-S-T, designs. And I thought I had another. Oh, I'm sorry. That one I've already read. That's why. Um, I'm not going to waste your time to look for it. But the other one was pretty good too. But anyways, back to the video.
I just want to point out the largest GDP in the United States is California. Texas is the second largest. The best real estate in the United States is the real estate we stole from Mexico. Imagine what Mexico's GDP would be like right now if it had California and Texas. Woo! Be a really different world. So, the real breakthrough moment happens with Lincoln. And it's because of the crisis of the Civil War. Lincoln really has no choice.
Sorry, I have some weird OCD, I guess. I just peeked around this. I just peeked around the computer screen, and the other book that I was trying to reference is just simply called Polk, P-O-L-K. It's a shorter book by Walter S. Borneman. It's a much shorter book than Country of Vast Designs, if you're interested.
But to exercise power that went way beyond what anybody conceived of as presidential power, because it was either that or accept the Confederacy breaking away. What's amazing about Lincoln is the maneuvering he does to get there. In other words, he's not like a bull smashing his way through. He's more like a dancer. And one of the ways that he pulls this off is information. So he surrounds himself in his administration with his own rivals, people that hated his guts, that were working against him, that thought it was irritating that he had become president. They didn't run in 1860 because they didn't think a Republican could win. He runs and he wins, and they're like, oh, if I had known a Republican could win, I would have run. They're those guys. He surrounds himself with that. That's his cabinet. But one of the things that happens then is because they're rivals to him and each other, they're constantly giving him the kind of information he needs, and he uses that information and them to leverage getting things through. The 13th Amendment is a miracle. It should have never been possible to get the 13th Amendment through. He gets it through. Saving the United States from splitting was...
That team of rivals that he created were people that Seward, Chase. It's a bunch of people who all had presidential expectations, and they kind of looked down on him. He ends up picking them for his cabinet because they were all top tier people running for presidency, and they all were good at certain things that he didn't feel he was good at. And so he would pick their brain, he would throw something out, and then hear them argue against it as to why it was a bad idea. Somebody else might throw over, well, I think this is an idea. And so when you're around a bunch of people who you can pick their brains from, it only makes you better. And you start to get ideas, and then it's like your mind opens up, and because you're getting ideas you didn't even expect to come out of places, next time your mind start thinking out of that box to start, well, what would he do? What would he? And he used those people, and it was as his presidency went on, I think it was Seward, who, by the way, is the one who bought Alaska from Russia. which I think he already mentioned. Um, Seward, they all thought he was like a country bumpkin. And Seward later on was just amazed at just how smart he was and how he really did let that side hide because he was telling jokes and stuff like that. But he wore you down and made you at ease. And Seward kind of thought after a while that was his way of probably bringing you, easing you down, and then kind of getting that tension out of you because you were going to go in thinking, I'm better than this guy. I'm smarter than this guy. I don't know why I'm doing this. And then he's entertaining. And now you're relaxed a little bit. And now you're not going in as aggressive. You're going in as relaxed and we're going to talk. And he was very good at that.
Not impossible by any means, but it was a difficult task. It needed a special kind of leader in that moment. If we had had an average, typical American president, like a Millard Fillmore, or a William Henry Harrison, or a Chester Alan Arthur, or a Calvin Coolidge, we'd be like 10 different states right now, not just 2. We'd have kept breaking up. Lincoln pulls it through, but in the process, at least briefly, we become really monarchical. You've heard the saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton, a British noble, said that. It's intense when a member of a hereditary aristocracy is talking about corruption and power corrupting people. He said it about Lincoln. He saw Lincoln as having become tyrannical. Now, there's no reason for me to think that he was full-on tyrannical, in part because we had the 1864 election. If he was truly a tyrant, he would have canceled it. He would have said, we're in a war, we can't have an election right now. Instead, Lincoln said, I don't know if I'll win it, but if we have this election now, there'll never ever be an excuse going forward to postpone an election. And that's a better precedent than me making sure that I'm still in charge when the Civil War ends. And the guy he ran against, George McClellan, he fired him twice. He was a Yankee general. That guy, his campaign was, if you elect me, I will let the Confederacy go.
And what a scumbag McClellan was, because as the military leader, his job was to make sure the Union was whole. And so quick he was to basically say, oh, I'll let them walk. So you're basically saying all the people that died, like you can't do that. You just can't do that. And there's a reason why McClellan was swept.
So
not just swept, I'm sorry, was devastated in the election.
So there was a lot at stake. And Lincoln went, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do this election anyway. And he does it. But in the meantime, he also did things like martial law for Chicago, New York, and Maryland. He suspended Maryland's constitution. He dumped habeas corpus, right? So there are moments where you see
Lincoln did I don't know if it was Maryland. I remember it was in the book A. Lincoln. I'm going to say Maryland. I could be wrong. I think the governor's election was coming up. And it was a Democrat as the governor of Maryland. Now, he was still supporting the Union, but he was sympathizing with the South. And there were slaves in Maryland at the time, even though it was a northern state. All northern states pretty much had them, except a few. Even them, they might have all had them. I don't know. Lost my train of thought. Oh, so this governor's running for re-election. And this is a terrible thing. Lincoln, he's running against a Republican. Lincoln says, we cannot have this guy win. We cannot risk this guy flipping and becoming a Confederate state. Because look where the capital is. There's a chunk of land taken away from Maryland, and DC's there. And Virginia's right on the south. Virginia Confederate, Maryland Confederate. Cannot be surrounded by Confederate states. So Lincoln allows every soldier to take leave to vote if they can leave to vote early, I think is what it was, if they're voting Republican. So they go and they vote Republican. If they're going to vote Democrat, they have to wait. And I don't think their vote was ever taken or counted. Maryland flips to Republican and stays in the Union for the rest of the war. Can't do that. I understand the situation. Can't do that. I understand how important it is to win this war for the North and to stop a state from flipping, because then that surrounds DC. Can't do that. Can't do that. If the system that we have says voting is the most important thing you can do as a citizen, can't do that. Can't do that. I love Lincoln. Can't do that.
Little tyrannical things popping up. But that 1864 election makes me think his goal was not to create a tyranny for himself. It was how he was going to navigate the crisis. We'll never really know for sure because John Wilkes Booth is a jerk. But a jerk who actually hurt the South. There's no two ways about it. Lincoln would have been a much better president during Reconstruction than Andrew Johnson. Not just because Andrew Johnson was a low IQ jackass, but just because Andrew Johnson was a low IQ jackass.
Well, also, and yes, he was also a drunkard. All right, let's not be disrespectful and forget some of the things that the guy was terrible about. Also, we don't know what Lincoln would have done other than try to rebuild the South. But we don't know because Lincoln never kind of formulated a plan or had one in his head and never wrote it down. So everything that we did, as in we as the North, did for the South was a best guess scenario. Are we doing what he wanted? He wanted us to rebuild. Okay, we're going to rebuild. How did he want us to rebuild? We have no idea. We've no idea.
So anyway, sad, but that's how it turns out. From that point on, we end up in a really bad place. So for the record, we had actually kind of been in a bad place up until then. Lincoln is the 16th president. If you can set aside genocide, Andrew Jackson was still a bad president. Martin Van Buren wasn't just any good, right? James Madison was probably on the path to being a good president, but then he triggers an unnecessary war with the British and they punish us. I don't know if y'all know this, but we lost the War of 1812. Yes, they surrendered. They surrendered on December 25th. As in, here's your Christmas present. Enjoy.
Let's say there were 100 battles for the War of 1812. Let's say we as America won 20. I don't know the exact battle count, but just stick with me. Of the 80 battles that the British and the Canadians, and sometimes the British and the Canadians and the natives won, might have been on a 1 to 10, 10 being extremely important, they might have maxed out at a 7. Those 20 battles that the Americans won were with their back against the wall, where the lowest score we would get is a 7. Jackson's Battle of New Orleans shouldn't count at all. But if you put it to a scoreboard, it was a 10. We won the battles we needed to win, so we didn't lose. But ultimately, we got beat down because we declared war not thinking that they would ever defeat Napoleon. It was like, oh yeah? Oh yeah? We declare war. What happened to Napoleon? They're coming where? They're coming here? Huh. Well, that kind of backfired, didn't it? That was pretty much it.
And they insisted it had to be December 25th. They wanted to make it clear to the universe that they won. They were just gifting us the victory. Jefferson was definitely.
To be fair, when they surrendered isn't really important, but they had just fought a war against Napoleon, and now they have to travel completely across the seas to come fight us again, and they were just done. So that was also another factor as to why they were willing to just say, you know what, we're not doing this again. Because the last time, it was an 8-year battle of chasing us all around. What happened when they burned the White House? We weren't there. We were doing the exact same thing. The White House, we proved the Capitol's not important. That's not how you beat us. You could burn it to the ground. It does not defeat us. And they were like, we're going to have another 6, 7, 8 years of this. Well, 5 years of fighting and then 3 years of negotiating where we don't fight, but we have to keep our troops fed and bring stuff. It's just not, we're not doing this again. So that's why during the whole negotiations, it was back to square one. We're back to where we were. You get what you have, we get what we have. Okay? And it was kind of like the British saying, okay, are you happy? And us saying, we lost the White House. We won New Orleans. I mean, I guess. Why did we fight all this for? And the British are like, we just want to go home, dude.
Okay, Polk, you might not agree with all his policies, but he was very successful at executing his policies. Like carving off the northern half of Mexico is pretty brutal. But, he still pulled it off, so you got to give him the success. Other than that, most of the presidents were. George Washington is complicated. George Washington did a bunch of nothing. But actually, when you think about it, that was perfect. Because it allowed us to just sort of get into a pattern and stabilize. Had we had a person who was too flamboyant and tried to pull off too many things, it would have been dangerous. That was a difficult moment, those first 8 years. So he was probably the right guy for the moment. So his talent was lack of talent. That was perfect. John Adams was, of course, a basket case. It was a disaster. John Quincy Adams wasn't even elected. He's our first president that wasn't even elected. We've had a few since. It's terrible. So, in other words, we were off to a bad start. Millard Fillmore, like, even the name makes you want to hate him. Like, what is that? Just Millard. Come here, Millard. So we were in trouble up until that moment. We get Lincoln, and then we're back into trouble land. Johnson's a disaster. He's replaced by Grant. So Grant as a general was amazing. U.S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant, right? U.S. Grant. Some people thought it was United States Grant. Some people thought it was Unconditional Surrender Grant. Whatever the U.S. stood for. He was an amazing general. His nickname was the Butcher, and he earned it. That's a good nickname for a general. Like, you don't want to get like the kind guy is your nickname if you're a general. You want a really rough name. He had it. The way the army figured out how to make him a good general was they noticed in the first couple of battles he was drunk. His wife and son came to visit. He stopped drinking. So his his staff went to the wife and son and said, we will give you the most deluxe, amazing tent in human history. Just a beautiful, big tent. We will cook, we will clean, we will darn your socks, we will tutor your son. Please don't leave us. Just stay with the army until this war is over. And the wife went, fine. And that's how they kept Grant sober. He didn't drink after that. He's just sober the whole time, ruthlessly slaughtering the Confederacy. It was just perfect. But as a civilian, he was a mess. Even his wife couldn't keep him from drinking. He needed the adrenaline of combat. By the way, he hated the sight of blood, just to bring it home. One time he saw a guy whipping a mule. He had the guy whipped. He said, I will not see that kind of cruelty. And you're like, okay. As a civilian, he was a disaster. We just elected him president. He continues to be a disaster. It was 8 years of drunk.
I'm going to go back because I'm running out of time, but I can tell that I'm going to be countering what he's saying here. So we're going to end it here. I'll be back with part 3. No, this is part 3. I'll be back with this one all over again. Or I'll do part 4. Part 4. I'm going to shut up now. Until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.